Paul was used to and was surrounded by a culture that is somewhat of a matrix. And so I'm going to try to take you into a little bit of a matrix today. If you feel that, then welcome. But Paul has applied these things that he's written to Apollos and himself for the Corinthians' benefit. The Corinthians had a problem in their existence as a brotherhood or a church, or as the congregations there in Corinth, those of Chloe's household and other people's household. They were arrogant. They were puffed up. And there was a reason for that. And a large part of it would be the reason that if I lived in that era, I too probably would be puffed up like they were. So this is not a easy slam dunk kind of text. This is something that Paul is trying to get under control because of the gospel being at stake. So, how should the church navigate through a matrix or a wilderness? Using the imagery of Israel having come out of Egypt, they are going to go through the wilderness, and they are going to need to go through it to the promised land. So the question I'm posing today is, how should the church navigate through the wilderness? And you already have the answers, but I'm rehearsing it for today. So the idea here is, one way is a GPS. You get your coordinates, and if you can do that by satellite or however you're out there. I have never done this. I've never been out in a place where I have gotten lost to the point where I have needed a handheld like that. That's kind of a cool looking handheld, though. I wouldn't mind having one just to say that I had one. So I want you to think about having a handheld GPS device where you are able to locate yourself and get back on track. And that is what God is able to do if we listen to His voice. We often go off track, and listening to His voice, we can find our way back to the right track or the right path and go through the wilderness. Another way is, well, who knows what this is? Anybody? Let's see who, besides Jason. I don't want Jason to answer. Jason probably knows exactly what it is. Anyone want to guess? Anyone dare to guess? It is army ants. Army ants. And do you see what they're doing? Yes, they are committing suicide is what they're doing. Yes. This is called a death spiral. A documented thing. Jason can correct me later if I'm wrong and tell you that Ty doesn't know what he's talking about. Or he can say, yes, Ty actually knows something. And maybe I do, maybe I don't. They follow their own pheromones. So like if one ant gets on a path and then another ant is like, hey, I don't know where I'm at. Where are those pheromones from the other ant? I'm going to follow the other ant. And so this is what they do. They begin, and they can't even see what they're doing, is they will just follow one another until they are exhausted and die. And this is called the army ant death spiral. So that is one way of trying to go through the wilderness or go into the matrix of our world, is just follow another ant. And so we have these two choices about how should the church navigate through the wilderness. Well, we know the answer to this already. So pheromones or GPS? Who wants to say GPS? Global Positioning System. Is it Global Positioning System, techies? Am I correct? Okay, I'm correct. I could have said something else. So the church is defined by Obviously, listening to Jesus' voice. We need to listen to Jesus' voice in the Bible about who the church is, what the church is about, what their vocation is about. And one of the problems that we have in navigating our culture is that it's our culture. And we cannot really escape the culture because we still live in it. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to be influenced by our culture. How many of you heard me use the word matrix? How many of you thought of Keanu Reeves? Yes, thank you. Okay, I think the Matrix movie is, by definition, a Gnostic movie. Okay? We need to define things, and we need to let Jesus define things for us in our world. Otherwise, we're kind of like the ants just following another ant. And so, I want to explore this definition of Gnosticism. Now, if this is new to you, that's okay. You don't have to understand everything about it. No one actually does. But there are proponents of it that still people are Gnostic today, and it might surprise you, maybe not, as to what this contributes to in our own thinking about what we think Jesus is talking about in the Bible, especially in regard to the world we live in. And should we escape it, or should we renew it? Gnosticism, that first definition up there, the Redeemer was sent by the divine being to release divine sparks found among some people so that they could return to the divine being. This was only possible if the individual understood the secret knowledge and practiced Gnostic rituals. Okay, secret knowledge, Bill, about that property out there? I'm just kidding. This is what Gnosticism is about, having a secret knowledge. How many of you, I never even watched this movie, how many of you saw The Da Vinci Code? No one. Okay. Go watch it. One. My eyes aren't that good. Two. This is like an auction. Okay. All right. So we have this idea, if you watch Dan Brown's movie, The Da Vinci Code, you're going to find Tom Hanks, and you're going to find the plot where they're looking for the secret knowledge, right? And this is what Gnosticism is all about. It's about saying that, hey, in the ancient world, the 4 canonical Gospels were only some of the texts selected. What's really out there, which you don't know about because it's secret, is ... And this is where you have a lot of Gnostic. Gnostic means knowledge, or an experiential type of knowledge. So I'm going to try to help you navigate through some of these things, but these are old things, but they still pervade our culture. So I want you to try and suffer through some of these definitions. Gnosticism is essentially this. It's different from other Greek words about knowledge, like oida. You have this idea. How many of you have ever driven a tank? Okay. Some of you say my vehicle is a tank. Okay. That's fine. How many of you know what a tank is? Yeah, there you go. Now, so none of you are Gnostic in regard to a tank, but you do have knowledge of a tank. So once you drive a tank, you will be Gnostic, so that you have experience of driving a tank. All right? So there you go. You have some idea. You have to have some inner experience in order to know what the truth is. Gnosticism rejected the church's teaching regarding both Christ's human and divine nature. It taught that Jesus did not inhabit a human body, nor did he die on a cross. In fact, there were other men named like Sarinth, and where you get Cerinthianism, where they taught that Jesus was He became divine at his baptism, but before he actually died, divinity left him. And then you begin to get problems, obviously, with all of these things. And so I have listed on my tablet, which I will give you, or my computer, which I'll give you, a bunch of isms that I want you to go through. And then I also have about 90 different topics with which I appreciate everyone who teaches, if they would join in talking to me about developing some sort of writing program for these things. The principle, number 3 there, of finding the light within oneself through pagan ceremonies is the essence of New Age religions. Gnosticism is not just in the old ancient world. Okay, this guy was pretty famous. And he says, "It seems to me that the only true Christians were the Gnostics, who believed in self-knowledge. For example, becoming Christ themselves, reaching the Christ within. The light is the truth. Turn on the light, all the better to see you with, my dear." So we have many influences in our culture that are obviously Gnostic. And I don't dislike John Lennon. I like the sounds of the music. And like I said, if I were living in the Greek era, I probably would have been one of those people like Timothy or somebody else who would have said, man, I really think those guys like Aristotle, Plato, and man, those guys are just really amazing people because they influenced all of the Greek world. So this is not supposed to be something that you will be like, oh, I know that. This is supposed to be something that's like, what in the world is that? You have archons, you have the demiurge, you have all kinds of different definitions that are Gnostic in a sense. And so you have this idea of attaining the divine life, the divine inspired life somehow through secret knowledge. And so you have different kinds of Gnostics, and they're really, careful and thoughtful about trying to explain all of these things. So if you want, you could go to Barnes & Noble, Amazon, whatever, find yourself something that is Gnostic in origin, and they'll be happy to tell you all about these things. So I'm not going to go through all of these definitions, but you have a lot of work in the world of Gnostic thinking. Didn't know this, but it is true, okay? I have said before, Thomas Jefferson wrote, I am an Epicurean. He was an Epicurean. There is something about the Enlightenment that changed the way the Western world thought about things. And one of the things was, in the Enlightenment, that we don't often talk about, is how Gnostic it actually is. And so all of the benefits that we enjoy, that's not to be debated. God can still bless through people who are not faithful to Him. We understand that, but this is different. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian. Okay, this is not a slam against the United States. I love the United States. I am from the United States. I have been blessed by the United States. I have no problems with the United States, or do I have any other problems with any other country around the world, because I'm not in control of any other country around the world. So this is not about patriotism being attacked. This is about the ideas of Jesus' gospel being attacked. False teaching is what I'm talking about today, unless I'm being unclear. John Adams was a Stoic. Their beliefs and thoughts, deism, all of these different things are not Jesus' thoughts about the world. We have benefited from some of their ideas, and they sought the classics, the Aristotle, the Greek influence that contributed to the way our country is. I am thankful for many things that God has done through these things. However, these are not the things that Jesus would have talked about, nor would He have endorsed. And so we have some challenges in our world that is very Gnostic, okay? And one of those things, again, is about the idea of Epicureanism or Stoicism. If you are Epicurean or Stoic, you look to escape from this world. You do not look to renew it. You look to escape from it through pleasure, hedonism, whatever it is. So this is something that is a problem in our world. We have churches that are dwindling and all over the country, let alone the world. In some areas they're growing because of persecution, but we have so many problems because our whole culture, Western culture, is essentially Gnostic. And what that ends up leading to is a belief in, you want to say your prayers, we'll give you some space to do that. But don't start talking about our politics. Don't start talking about our anything in, dealing with our government, our country. No, don't do that. You just go pray. You just do your private thing. You find your own spirituality and you're okay. That's Gnostic. There's no such thing as church and state in Jesus. Separation of it. No such thing. In the ancient world, there's no such thing. And so these are big ideas meant to be dissected. Why? Because they threaten the gospel. They threaten God's renewal of His creation. They threaten Christianity as we know it. And I'm not saying that they intentionally knew what they were doing. I don't believe they did. Probably thinking that King James Version Bible had something to do with it. It's not the best. Based on the Textus Receptus, not the greatest idea. The church is defined by what? Jesus and His gospel. But we have to explain that. We have to talk about all of the elements of the biblical components involved in what Jesus did to fulfill God's promises and how those promises are being fulfilled through you and I today. And that one of those main parts of that is that you and I, if we cannot articulate our faith in a multicultural world, well, then we can't articulate our faith. And people can't come to faith in Jesus if we can't figure out how to talk about it. This is a problem for all Christians, not just ourselves. This is really difficult for the church. The church is trying to go through the wilderness. It's going through a matrix. And if it starts just saying, well, let me listen to these other ants, it's going to be a death spiral, and it often has. But if we say, no, I think we need to listen to God's voice, and we need to listen carefully. There's some these coordinates, as weird as they look, are pretty important, because it lets us know exactly where we are. The church is defined by what? Well, we started with this, we're going to end with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. Paul is telling a very educated Greek culture, I have applied all these things that I have written to myself and Apollos for your benefit, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written. What was written? In your bulletin article, I have suggested what my response to this very difficult question is. I do not believe that he is talking at this point. You can correct me, argue with me, whatever you want to do. That's good. Iron sharpens iron. The New Testament was not written yet. There were 4, correctly, out of 27 books of the Bible that we don't have. Okay, so James, and the other one's Galatians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. Those are the books of our Bibles that were probably written but not yet canonized, because you don't have anything canonized till about 400 AD. And so you don't have an entire New Testament. Paul is not speaking in what my belief is. He's not speaking about a New Testament. He's talking about what he has just written to the Corinthians about being puffed up in favor of one against another. Some of you say I'm of Apollos. Some of you say I'm of Cephas. Some of you say I'm of Paul. Was Paul crucified for you? He's using Greek rhetoric to shame them. Is Christ parceled out like that? No. But that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take pieces of Christ and you're trying to create your own version of Christ that is not the biblical Christ, that is not according to the Scriptures. But what I have just written to you, don't boast in anyone except the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 31. Don't go beyond that. Why? It's very dangerous when you do. Why? Because they're just ants following ants sometimes. That's not the GPS. What's the GPS? What is written? What I have told you is fulfilled. What I have preached to you. What you think is foolishness now, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18, is actually the power of God that is able to save us. And you're treating it as foolishness. You think it is wise what you're doing. Most of them are Gnostic in their thinking to begin with. There's a denial of the resurrection in chapter 15. How did they get there? Could it have been because that's entirely their culture? Acts chapter 17. Paul is speaking, look, I'm telling you, Epicureans, Stoics, whom he's speaking to, Areopagus, what kind of education do these people have? Very educated, very highly educated, but very misunderstood in terms of when you compare it to Jesus. They don't understand it. And yet, it turns into arrogance. So the church must navigate through the matrix. The church must navigate through the wilderness. We're in that right now. We have been delivered, but not completely. We are still awaiting the resurrection of Christ that He brings us when He returns. We're not there yet. So in the meantime, we have to navigate, and especially for a lost world, exactly where we're at and what we're talking about. And I know this today is a lot deeper than other things that I have done in the past, and it's intentionally that way. This is just the surface of some of these things. Docetism, learn what that is. I already said Cerinthianism. Learn what antinomianism is. Learn what covenantal nomism is. Learn what all kinds of isms are. Dualism, Zoroastrianism. Learn who Johannes Agricola is. Learn all of these people. No, that takes too much time. Yeah. Martin Luther, Anne Hutchinson. Learn all of these people. Why? Because we're talking about the gospel in regard to how to navigate through the wilderness. And if we don't have coordinates and we just listen to ants, okay, and we've all listened to other ants before. So there's no boasting saying, I haven't listened to an ant. Well, there's your first. Now you have. Okay, you just lied. So Paul applies these things to himself and Apollos, not only for the Corinthians' benefit, but for all Christians' benefit. Why? So that we may learn not to go beyond what he's written about. Don't boast in anybody else. Why? They're just an ant. Get the GPS. If you have any need this morning, if you need to be baptized into Christ, now is a very good time to do it because God has commanded it. And there's a reason why He's commanded it, because that conveys your trust and obedience in Him, and that you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God, and that He has come to deliver you from this world through the sacrifice of Himself on a Roman execution tool, and that He has overcome that. They did their worst to Him, and He has overcome it. They cannot kill Him any longer, and now you and I can look forward to living in righteousness, and we are not slaves to sin anymore. So this is the reason, again, Paul will give for being baptized. It is not a magical thing. It is a faith obedience thing that is from the beginning of our Bible. If you have that need this morning, you are more than welcome to make it known as together we stand and sing.